This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. We talked about what could go wrong with the Cleveland Browns, and it was a very depressing episode of a video on my channel. It wasn't fun to look at everything from that angle, but this is why we look at it from both angles, because now we get to have some fun. Now we get to talk about what the Browns ceiling is and why they can reach that ceiling. And for this season, I think the Browns ceiling is a Super Bowl championship. Not every season you get to say that. And not every season that you get to say that do you even come close to living up to those expectations. But that is where the ceiling is for this Cleveland Browns team. If they stay healthy, if they play up to their level that we have seen them play at, if Nick Chubb can return to being Nick Chubb and all other factors that I'm going to talk about in this video, the Browns can win a Super Bowl. And it's not a crazy thing to think that they could do it. Now, it's going to take some things going right, like any team that wins a Super Bowl is going to require that some things go right for them. But it's definitely on the table for the Cleveland Browns if they can do the things necessary to be able to achieve it. Much like my list from earlier this week, these things compound on top of each other, right? It's not just one thing that's going to make the Browns a championship contender or a team that can win the championship. It's not going to be as simple as, oh, Deshaun Watson throws for 4,500 yards. The Browns can be a Super Bowl champion. It's going to take a little bit more than that, right? It is going to take more things than just that going right for the Browns to win a championship. But let's talk about it. One of the things that could go right for this team is something I don't think a lot of people consider, because we've been so down into the worst case scenario with the Browns offensive line. We really haven't considered what the best case scenario could be. And the question that I have here to get us to this best case scenario is, what if a change of staff at offensive line is exactly what the Browns offensive line needed? Look, it's no secret that this line has plateaued and slightly declined since 2020, and that was overseen by Bill Callahan, right? The guy that we're giving all the credit to. He kind of oversaw the slow decline of this offensive line. You saw guys like Jed Wills peak in their first year, but kind of regressed since. You've seen guys like Wyatt Teller peak in the first year and kind of regressed since, right? And the question here is, what if Callahan was really good for giving young players a baseline, right? Giving them the basics, the fundamentals. But when it came to adding on top of that, maybe that wasn't his strong suit. A lot of things would suggest that that's the case. Not trying to denigrate Callahan as an offensive line coach, but just pointing out a trend that's happened with the Browns offensive line since 2020. What if a new offensive line coach, Andy Dickerson, is exactly what the Cleveland Browns offensive line needed? Maybe a change of pace, a change of voice is what Jed Wills needed in a contract year to be able to reach his potential. We know that Jed is supremely talented. He has the talent to be one of the better left tackles in all of football. The question is are we going to spend Jed Wills' entire career talking about, is he going to live up to that talent? Like, is he going to be the Jeff Green of left tackles? Is that going to be the case with Jed? Or is Jed going to reach his potential and kind of live up to it? Is he going to be David Njoku? Is he going to be somebody else, right? David Njoku, we talked about his potential, his entire rookie deal. And it's not hard to look at Jed Wills and see some parallels with David Njoku. Because with Jed and David, by this point in their careers respectively, right, the end of David's rookie deal and the end of Jed's rookie deal, Browns fans were fed up with both of them. We forget how fed up with David Njoku. He had requested a trade. He wasn't productive in 2019. Like, we were pretty much done with David Njoku by the time he got to his 5th-year extension. But now look where we're at with David Njoku. The Browns staff stuck with him. And now David Njoku is a cornerstone of this team. The same could happen with Jed Wills, a obviously talented player who's had a hard time living up to the expectations of being the 10th overall pick. And maybe the Browns stick with this longer, despite not a lot of people loving that decision, including myself, and it works out for them because they unlock that potential later on in his career. That could start with a change of offensive line coach. That could start with a change of just slight ways of how the Browns go about it. And maybe you get a better Jed Wills out of it. Maybe you get a better Wyatt Teller out of this. Maybe you get more out of Joe Bitonio or Ethan Posick or DeJuan Jones out of this change. It is certainly possible that the Browns personnel or the Browns offensive line could benefit from a change of voice in that O-line room, because as good as Bill Callahan is, there's room for another voice in that room to help guys get better. And I think Andy Dickerson is a very good offensive line coach, so I wouldn't be surprised if that ended up being something that helps them. And then if you have if you have a better offensive line because of the change of voice in the room and the change of philosophy and the play style, what does that do for Jerome Ford? What does that do for Nick Chubb? If the offensive line is playing at a much better level than it did last year, I think Jerome Ford and Nick Chubb could be a nasty combo when both of them are healthy. Nick Chubb is great at the every down running back stuff. I don't really got to tell you what Nick Chubb is good at. You've watched Nick Chubb. You know what Nick Chubb's good at. But Jerome Ford, I think, can be the ultimate complement to Nick Chubb, because the things that Nick Chubb doesn't do well, I think Jerome Ford does do well. You talk about Nick Chubb, he's not the greatest pass protector, he's not the greatest route runner in the world. I don't expect that to get better with him coming off an ACL injury and him never really being that great at it in the first place. But now you don't have to worry about that, because Jerome Ford is more than capable of being a receiver out the backfield and pass protecting. And also, Jerome Ford has a very different run style than Nick Chubb, right? Nick Chubb will stretch it out and try to break tackles behind the line of scrimmage and find different cut lanes and really be patient with it. Jerome Ford, he's a pinball, right? He just gets shot out that gun and he just goes down here. It's not really going to be much for the wiggle left or right, but he has that breakaway speed that makes him dangerous. Like, you're going to attack the edges with Jerome Ford. And I think Jerome Ford is probably somebody who's going to benefit from some RPOs being in there, some read options being in the Browns offense. I think that combo, right, Jerome Ford, Nick Chubb, Deontay Foreman with a better offensive line really has the potential to get the Browns running game back to 2020, 2021 levels of efficiency when they had peak Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb going at it with each other. So that three-headed monster, I think, can be a real thing. The upside of this offense is something to think about, right? We all know that the defense, they're probably going to be one of the best defenses in the NFL, if not the best defense in the NFL. But this offense has a ton of upside. Let's start with the wide receivers, and then we'll talk about the quarterback position. Wide receiver wise, Jerry Jeudy, tons of upside there. Now, will he capture it? Again, this is a similar conversation that the Browns had with David Njoku. It's a similar conversation that the Browns are currently having with Jed Wills, except for the Browns did not employ Jerry Jeudy over the last 4 years like Jed Wills has. But Jerry Jeudy, tons of potential. Coming out of Alabama, he was one of the best wide receivers in a loaded wide receiver class. He was seen as the best route runner in that draft class and somebody who's going to be a big-time impact player. Now, he's been a good player for the Denver Broncos, but he hasn't been the big-time impact player I think they expected him to be when they drafted him. Now that the expectations are different in Cleveland, now that he has a contract, now that he has less to worry about when it comes to his future in Cleveland, and less of a hostile environment when it comes to the media in Cleveland with him, given that he was openly beefing with like 12 dudes in the Denver Broncos media apparatus. It's an environment for him to be successful. And if that is the change that he needed to get to the best that he can be, you have somebody who could potentially be a number one wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. But if he's not a number one wide receiver, you're talking about a really high tier number two, right? A Devontae Smith level 2 wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. And that's just really a nice place to be at. If you could rely on Amari Cooper as to be Amari Cooper and have Jerry Jeudy there, you also have guys with upside like Elijah Moore in that wide receiving room and Cedric Tillman, who's really starting to look like somebody who might produce for the Browns this year, given how good his camp was. All of those things get you excited about the upside of this passing game. And then you factor in Deshaun Watson. And it's worth remembering that Deshaun Watson's success that people talk about was not success that did not happen in the NFL. Like sometimes it feels like he just did not play NFL football until he was traded with the Cleveland Browns. And now those 12 games he's put together with the Cleveland Browns are the only thing that he's done. And look, I've said this in a video before and I'll say it again. If you look at the numbers, they're disappointing for Deshaun Watson. Nobody's going to say that this is what they expected his numbers to look like. 12 games into playing with the Cleveland Browns. Even after we knew he got a suspension, nobody would have told you that they only expected after 2 years for him to only play 12 games. So all of those things are disappointing. There's reason to be down on Deshaun Watson and disappointed with Deshaun Watson. But it's also worth remembering that Deshaun Watson was seen as one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL not too long ago. And that's something that he can be able to get back to. If you look at it, it's not surprising the numbers haven't been great, because if you look at the context of the games that he's played in, it makes sense, right? Coming off of a 700-day hiatus, we all kind of underestimated what that would be like for Deshaun Watson. He ended up looking like a dude who hadn't played football in 700 days. He comes back for 2023, and in his first 3 games, he has one decent game in a monsoon against Cincinnati. The second game, he didn't play well against Pittsburgh, and in the third game, he had one of his best games as a Cleveland Brown against Tennessee. Gets hurt. Comes back from that injury too early, gets pulled out of that game, comes back when he's healthy enough, plays against the Arizona Cardinals, looks good against the Arizona Cardinals, but the Browns blow them out so badly that he doesn't have to play more than 3 quarters. So the stats are going to be limited by he wasn't asked to do much. You play Baltimore. He has a shaky start to that game, but ends up finishing it very strong. Not in a way that shows up on the stat sheet tremendously, but in a way that if you watched it, you're very impressed with what Deshaun Watson was able to do against one of the best defenses he could play, because the best defense in the NFL is playing for the Cleveland Browns. He gets hurt. And it feels like we were like, hey, man, Deshaun Watson seems like he's ready to come back and play well by the end of that Baltimore game. This is where we were. We were like pretty high on it. Like, hey, he's going to be back. The Browns can legit win a Super Bowl. Look what we just did to the 1 seed in the AFC. We got a chance to win it all this year. This is legitimately, if you go back to the video after that game, this is where we were at. We were all right here. Even the people who are sick and tired of Deshaun Watson now, this is where they were at the last time Deshaun Watson played a football game. During the course of the time, because he's been injured and because other things have been happening in the absence of him playing, Browns fans have gotten all the way back down to, where we started probably in like 2023. So it is a odd cycle, to say the least. But the truth is, if we felt that strongly about Deshaun Watson the last time he played football, and all the Browns have done is add weapons to that receiving room and then add an offensive coordinator who's going to bring elements that are a lot more familiar with Deshaun Watson to this game, then it makes sense that that's probably going to look good. Like, it's not going to be the most shocking thing in the world to me if Deshaun Watson looks good to start the year and looks good for the rest of the year. So if Deshaun Watson plays well, you get better offensive line play. You have that 3-headed monster at at running back. I can't talk today. But you have that 3-headed monster at running back. And then you have the Browns defense, which, like, I don't even need to tell you why I think that defense could win it all in 2024. That's a Super Bowl ready defense. They were Super Bowl ready last year. And if they stay healthy, they're going to be a Super Bowl caliber defense. You got that. You got the offense. You got a reliable kicker in Dustin Hopkins, so you're not worried about goofiness messing that up. And you can see a team that can clearly win a championship. Now, it's not going to be easy in the AFC. You got to get through Pat. Pat's two-peated. It's going to be hard for them to three-peat. We'll see how their roster holds up towards the end of the season, but it's going to be difficult. You got to get through to Baltimore, who I think is more gettable this year than they were last year. And I think the Browns could get them last year because the Browns beat them last year in Baltimore when they had at least Deshaun Watson. Now that you're going to add Nick Chubb back to that mix, if we're talking about the playoffs, the Browns stand even more of a chance. Cincinnati, we feel good about the Browns' chances versus Cincinnati. They're going to be a good team, and the Browns match up with them well, but you don't feel like that's a team that you can't beat. Like, this feels like a year where the Browns have that quarterback play that they've been expecting. They get offensive line play that allows that quarterback play to blossom, and I think you can have some other things blossom because of that, the running game included. If you get this offense to top 10 level with a number one defense and a pretty good special teams unit, I mean, how is that not a team that can win a championship? It's very logical. It's not even emotional. Usually when I make this video and I'm talking about the upside, I feel a need to be a little bit more emotional because I'm making a more emotional argument. This is not that. I'm making a very logical argument. Look at what the Browns roster has. Even the biggest question mark about the Cleveland Browns, the quarterback position, we're talking about a guy who was a top 5 quarterback in 2020 and is still under 30 and has showed no signs of a physical decline. I know a lot of people are convinced that there's been a physical decline, but he runs as well as he's ever ran. He breaks tackles as well as he's ever done it. And he throws the ball well still. Like, there's been the reports out of camp that his arm looks great. So if the physical thing is not dropping off for him, and maybe it's just a getting used to playing football regularly thing for him, if he stays healthy, he should be pretty good. This could be a team that can win a championship. Now, it might be a dark horse. It might be a underdog for a lot of people, but not us. We know what's going on here. We know this team went 11-6 last year with all those injuries, and we know what we thought about this team the last time they were relatively healthy versus the Baltimore Ravens last year, that we thought that this was a serious contender to win the Super Bowl in 2023 until all the injuries happened. So that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you think the Browns can win it all in 2024? Let me know. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.